It's winter, and you can now get almost anything you need for the coldest months of the year delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a ski slope delivered, but you can get dish soap delivered. Sunshine, that's a no. But a bottle of wine, that's a yes. A snow angel, sorry, no. But angel hair pasta, Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol and select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks Podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Chris Canfield. Chris's company, Suspension Formulas, develops and licenses mountain bike suspension designs used by brands including Revel and Canfield Bikes. Now he's launching his own bike brand, Vampire Bikes, while also continuing to race downhill at the Masters level. Thanks for joining me, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeff.
So I wanted to start by talking about your downhill racing background. So you raced at the pro and elite level for many years. And then in 2019, you won the UCI Masters World Championship at Mont St when I believe you were in your 40s. So what's allowed you to be so fast for so long?
I have no idea. It's not like I don't have injuries or whatever. I just love it. I mean, if I could be between the tape, like, honestly, every couple of days, I'd be happy. I mean, there's a race series up in BC for the BC Cups where they do back-to-back-to-back, a weekend race, a Wednesday race, and then another weekend race so that, like, people don't have to travel so much.
Yeah.
And it was the most fun I've ever had in my life because it was like, get done with racing, have one day of travel, and start practice all over again. I was like, I could do this the rest of my life. This would be so much fun.
Wow. I mean, what do you enjoy about it? Are you like a really competitive person, or like, what is it about racing that you find so fun?
I guess I'm competitive. I don't really see myself as the classic competitive person. I'm pretty laid back. I like the dissecting a track in a way that you don't normally ride a trail, and the way that a racetrack makes you do weird off-camber, hard techie moves just for the time. And it always pushes my limit above like my skill level in a lot of ways. I remember when I was first racing, the opening rounds of the Norba Nationals was Big Bear, and I couldn't jump for shit back then. And I remember there was like 40-foot jumps with like really like big, tall, sharp walls for the landing pads and no room for error, and waking up in the morning going, I've got to jump these jumps. I've never jumped anything this big, but today I've got to go into practice and jump something gigantic and be way over my head. And I love that. I love the fact you kind of get to travel around and race in different places instead of just being in the same old place. And I find that if I'm not racing, I kind of get bored.
Okay.
You're just kind of riding the same old trails, doing the same old stuff, and there's nothing to push for.
Yeah. Well, would you say, I mean, so it sounds like a big part of it is, you enjoy that like strategy aspect of it, the newness, always like a new challenge to kind of crack and unwrap. But then I also hear you saying that like you enjoy challenging trails, technical trails. Like, would you say like for fun, would you rather go ride like a really technical trail or like a fast and flowy, like jumpy sort of trail?
I like both a lot.
Okay.
I would rather race a technical trail.
Yeah. Is that your better suit in terms of racing? Yeah,
but I find the jump trails are kind of boring. And if you don't have a really good scrub and there's nothing going on a smooth jump line trail, like an Air DH, there's just like smooth track and bumps. And, you're catching air a little bit here and there, but the technical stuff is what's challenging and fun. And I might be good at it, but at the same time, there's lots of people that have a lot better, tech riding skill or mud riding skill than I do.
Yeah.
I really like the gathering of all of your friends, that you end up just making all these friends from all over the world. Just because they're doing the same thing. You see them all the time at the races and you're like, oh, you're back again. And we're going to pal around for the weekend.
Yeah. That's cool. And I think, I think it's really helpful understanding like your background and your riding style as we start talking about like suspension design and your new bike brand. How much, as a racer though, like how much of downhill racing would you say is about equipment versus the rider? Like how important is the bike really when it comes to being competitive in downhill?
I love that people have always said it's not the bike, it's just the rider.
Yeah, pretty common.
But I always used to laugh at that because me and my brother were making a bike that had open neutral braking that was rearward arc in the early days. And we were competing against people that had brake jacky, lock up under braking single pivots
Yeah.
and bikes that didn't pedal well. And almost no one had a pulley wheel rearward arc bike for a long time. And in those days, I would have 100% told you it's 100%, the bike is a huge advantage, advantage, especially if you had the one or two good brakes on the market or you were using the good tubeless system with good rubber. Those were huge advantages. Like I remember racing Sugar Mountain, Norman National. I was first year pro. It was my best finish. That's why I remember it so well. And this was back when everybody had their World Cup teams go to the Norman Nationals. So Sam Hill was there. He won. And, I beat John Kirkcaldy that lap. I was so excited. I took 12th. And, Brendan Fairclough was there. The whole gamut of all those old classic racers. But Sam Hill had wet screens, and they weren't available in America. They were available in Europe. They didn't really sell them or import them here. And we were riding like Swamp Things, which were garbage mud tires. And he had spikes, and he was ripping because it was a really bad mud race. And he ripped. I mean, he got us all by a lot. I mean, it was Sam Hill and all, but I mean, there were sections where he went full pace and just carved through stuff where we were like full skid, sliding around, feet out, and he had full traction. So this is kind of the one sport where your equipment can be a huge advantage. I love that it was like 2017 or so, if I remember correctly, when Amaury Pirion had a Commensal with the pulley wheel, like a rearward arc bike. And I had one since 2001. So I knew how much faster they were than a regular bike, especially on like tech trails and bumpy trails, really rough tracks. And he swept that season so hard. He shocked the whole world. And all of a sudden, every brand is building a pulley wheel bike.
Right.
And they woke up to the fact that like, that is really, really fast. And I was like, I've been telling everybody.
Yeah. Well, it'd be a fascinating experiment, right? Like what if you could have a race where all the top current pros are there, but they all have to ride the same bike, same exact like setup. Then we would know, right?
I would really love to see that.
See what the difference is, right? Somebody's going to win. There's going to be a difference. Some are going to be faster, but like, what is the gap going to look like between these athletes if they were all on the same equipment?
And I thought about that same thing, and I think it's the coolest. Like, I would love to see it because
it'll never happen because it's like, which bike are we going to use? And also, like, I haven't practiced on this bike, and
it would be kind of cool though, just to be like, here's a big purse. You have to ride the one bike. Whatever it is.
Yeah, whoever provides the purse.
Yeah, that would be cool. Like one brand provides the purse. Everybody has to ride that bike, that fork, those tires, those brakes, and see who's really the best driver.
Yeah.
And just coming full circle, I think nowadays most of the bikes aren't a bad design anymore. There's a few that still lock up under braking, which I would never ride. I would have a really hard time as a pro racer, like wanting or having to ride a bike that just doesn't absorb the bumps and track the ground when you're pulling the brakes on a steep descent.
Yeah.
Especially through rock garden stuff. It feels like a hardtail, and it's really hard to be under control in that situation. So, but I mean, in the old days, wow, was it a big difference?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not that big a deal anymore. And even all of that being said, it's still whoever is peaking in their conditioning at the time. You can tell, like, people will go into like segments of conditioning where for like a month they're just peaking.
Yeah.
And they're unstoppable because their heart rate, their ability to sprint for 4 minutes is just doing really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
There's no injuries, and they're able to push those runs relaxed and strong. And you see it, like Rat Boy. He had a segment in that year where he was just unstoppable. That Worlds where he broke his foot in Norway, he was basically just pumping down the track and gaining time on everyone.
Yeah.
And he looked like that the whole season. He was just comfortable, just perfectly in that zone where his speed couldn't be touched.
Yeah.
And Stevie Smith had the same kind of year one time. And I think it's just one of those, when everything starts clicking, their conditioning is perfect, and that's really the rider thing. I mean,
yeah, so many factors. Because, right, even the rider on the day, it could be a difference between the podium is, just somebody had a really good day and somebody else didn't have a good day that day. So we'll never know the answer to that question, I'm sure.
If I had to say one answer, it would be the rider. Look at Loic.
Mm-hmm.
He's been in that zone and on that cutting, sharp edge of the speed factor his whole career. Like that guy will go down as the greatest of all time. Sorry, Minar, I really like Greg, but I mean, that dude he's something so special in our sport that I don't think when he's done that his record will ever get matched.
Yeah. Well, getting back to your story, like in the beginning, it sounds like you were involved in building bikes, designing bikes pretty early on. Was that out of necessity, or was that something that you really enjoyed and found that you were good at?
It was weird because I was running the office at Canfield Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother was, our engineer and designing everything. And, we were both racing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really became a passion of mine to really research and figure out what was winning races, what would the secret formula was for a bike to win races. So in those early days, I, linkage, the suspension program came out, and I basically dove into that like a kid on crack. I loved looking at everybody's models and what the computer program said about them, and then finding them at the resort and bugging somebody that had that bike to let me ride it, to feel what that bike felt like, and then go back to the model and say, okay, what did the model say that this bike is supposed to do and what those numbers said? And so I would try to ride my bike back to back against those bikes and see how I could improve our own stuff. And then I would watch all of the race movies nonstop. I would slow them into slow-mo and watch the bikes, because they had just World Cup, practice and race footage in those movies. So I would slow-mo the race footage and watch what bikes were doing and what the model said about those bikes, and try to make something for, my own brand. Honestly, that was my own race rig.
Right.
I wasn't going to get sponsored by another brand, so I had to build my own stuff to be able to be the fastest stuff out.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because we're seeing that right now, right? Like a lot of brands are cutting budgets and sponsorships. And it seems like just in the last year, there's been a lot of athletes who have decided to take a similar path, right? Like Nico with Frameworks, and Cam Zink's got his own bike brand now. And then you've got the guys going into components and stuff, Fabio Widmer and Danny McCaskill with Cast, and Wade Simmons with Godfather's Garage. Like, what do you make of this? Like, is this something new? Or, I imagine it's always been hard to get sponsors for professional racing.
Yeah, it's really new. I think that with social media's ability to market and to reach people, I think these athletes are realizing that I could do my own product, advertise on my own channel. I have so many followers that no matter what I build, I can have a huge enough reach to be able to make a living without a sponsor, to sell my own stuff.
Yeah. It's risky too, though, right?
Oh, sure. It's like Zink, he's in the free ride market that's really, really small, but he's got such a huge reach that he'll do great. And then like Nico, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
To get a frame built in a lot of different locations and do lots of testing and come at it brand new and do as well as he's done with a bike that is obviously working extremely well.
Yeah.
So yeah, but these guys are, they're riding like whatever some random engineer is giving them. So they finally get to do their own thing.
Right.
And build what they know works or could work because they're at the highest level of riding.
Yeah. I mean, brands, though, some of the brands I've heard, for them, some of their athletes are really helpful in that regard, right? In terms of testing and letting them know what they're feeling and, maybe even suggesting improvements to products. And then, but not all athletes are good at that, right? Like, obviously, you are able to take like what you know from racing and like apply that. But do you think all athletes are able to do that?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Honestly, when athletes talk about developing products, I kind of snicker. I've had athletes tell me exactly the wrong opposite of what is reality of what they're feeling.
Yeah.
And because you can ride a bike really well doesn't necessarily mean you know what's going on with it in the feeling of like an attribute. I mean, there's suspension designs that lock up under braking and multiple reviewers and athletes don't mention it or talk about it or think about it at all. And I think it's because they're not riding stuff back to back. If they rode a bike back to back with that other, what they're on, they would realize, well, what the heck is going on? Why is it really hard to ride this tech section? It doesn't feel like my back wheel is moving or tracking the ground anymore. But they don't feel it for some reason. So I think it's more that no matter what they produce, they can sell it, and that's a good business model. But I don't really necessarily think that a lot of the high-level athletes know how to product design.
Yeah, right. I guess we'll see because a lot of these are so new. I guess the other one I failed to mention is the Athertons. And, it seems like people like those bikes and, it seems to be working out for them. But like you said, not all athletes can maybe do that.
I mean, the Athertons is just partnered with smart people like Dave Weigel for their suspension design.
Right.
And that company that was building those under a different label. And they needed someone to put their name on it, looked like to me. And I don't know how much tweaking that the Athertons are personally doing in that brand, but they're obviously working really well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point too. The athlete involvement, I'm sure, varies a lot. And what you're doing is definitely different, right? So you've got these suspension designs, patented suspension designs that your company supports, and Canfield Balance Formula, CBF, I believe, is the most widely adopted so far. Tell us a bit about that design in layman's terms. Like what's the idea behind it, and kind of at a high level, how does it work?
We always try to describe it as focusing on the center of curvature being on top of the chainring.
Okay.
So suspension design for pedaling is really what most people are looking for. There's certain things about braking that happen that people don't really need to focus on that much. It's just kind of, you get what you get depending on a wheel path or, configuration of your suspension layout. But the pedaling is what everyone feels. That's what their holy grail is, to try to be efficient.
Right.
And so in suspension, there is the instant center, which is where the pivot points of the links point at.
Okay.
Usually forward into space. And that is basically a pedaling balance point for the system.
Okay.
So what designers are looking for is to point the line of the upper chain, which is the force line, the line that's tugging from your cranks, forward as you spin your cranks. So that top of the chain is like the force line of the world.
Right.
It is like shoving forward, as you're pedaling. And if that is pointing where the instant center is, it won't tug up on the suspension or down on the suspension.
I see.
If it tugs up, it means the bike will be squishy and bouncy and inefficient from what they call pedal bob.
Okay.
And if it's below it and tugs down on the suspension, it feels kind of stiff and efficient. But the trade-off if you do too much of that is that the bike won't track the ground and absorb bumps, and it also causes all of the chain stretch pedal kick.
Okay.
Which is basically a lengthening of the chainstay, when it moves through travel, and it kicks the cranks backwards. And it's the feeling of somebody punching the bottom of your feet.
Right.
Like your pedals bouncing a bunch. You don't realize that the bike feeling kind of out of control and bouncy is actually the chain system, kicking your feet.
Okay.
So a lot of designers will just add a lot of what they call anti-squat, which is the chain pointing below that instant center.
Yeah.
And it causes it to feel very efficient in the parking lot of the bike shop to sell bikes. And it feels pretty good when you're pedaling like up a road.
Yeah.
So if you live in Bellingham, all you do is pedal up roads. There's a rare uphill trail there.
Yeah.
It's just like, just get on the road and grind up.
Right.
And that's not a bad thing if you're just doing that. But on your downhill, it can cause the bike to just feel kind of rough.
Yeah.
It's kicking your feet a lot. It's not really tracking the ground neutrally. So CBF, the patent basically patents the center of curvature to be on top of the chainring. So the center of curvature is also a trackable thing in the linkage program.
Okay.
Where that is the center of the curves of the wheel path.
Okay.
Think of it like this. A single pivot, it rotates around the one pivot. And so the wheel path circle is like basically the center of that circle is that single pivot.
Okay.
But on a multi-link bike, like a horse link, BPP, DW, CBF, like anything that has multi-links, that center spot of the wheel path moves around because the arc of the wheel path is not a consistent circle.
Right.
So bikes can do all sorts of funky things with their center of curvature. They can move around all over the place. And I just happened to kind of stumble into, what if I put that spot on top of the chainring? Because if that spot's on top of the chainring, I can teeter-totter the chain to point at the instant center that's in front of the cranks.
Okay.
And track it as it moves through travel. So imagine, like, since you get to see me in video.
Listeners, imagine.
Sorry, everybody. Imagine that the instant center is like a smiley face out in front of your cranks, about 6 inches. And then your chain is rotating on top of the chainring. As it moves through travel, it lifts kind of up on top of the chainring. Well, if the center of the arcs of the wheel path are there as well, both the wheel path and the chain are moving kind of together at the same location,
right?
Even though it's a multi-link bike, which gives you the good open neutral braking.
Yeah.
And there's some other like happy things that happen that I won't go into in the physics of secrecy. But basically it allows the chain to track that instant center that's in front of the chainring all the way through travel. It's tighter than almost any other suspension system I've seen. Because, I mean, it basically just depends on what gear you're in or what gear in the cassette I'm designing to, just because the chain jumps in the rear up and down a bunch.
Right.
So the angle will miss that little instant center just a hair, but not that much. But because I'm on top of the chainring that way, I can have a bike that doesn't have the over amount of anti-squat, the tug down effect, and still get it to be, it feels like to me that not only is it open and neutral to track the ground under braking, but it's open and neutral to track the ground under pedaling without power loss.
Okay.
So people will be like, I can see the shock moving, I can see the link moving, it's not really all that efficient because it's just not locked.
Yeah.
Like a shock lockout feel.
Right.
And I go, but did you feel like you were losing any power or momentum with your pedal stroke? And everyone's like, no. It feels like it just tracks the ground and can tractor through like rough stuff and up rooty, rocky climbs. And it moves around even under pedal stroke, even under, full power. Yet it still feels like all of your power that you're putting into your cranks is only propelling the back wheel forward instead of moving the suspension up or down.
Yeah.
And so it feels like the most energetic and efficient thing you've been on.
Yeah.
That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful. And yeah, I've tested the Revel Rascal and found that to be true. It feels like it pedals really efficiently. It's not clear as the rider, like what exactly is going on, but yeah, that's a great explanation.
Well, I don't tell you exactly everything in the secrecy of physics. I try to keep my job is what it boils down to.
Right. Makes sense. Well, so, a lot of what you're saying kind of is based around focusing on pedaling, right? And that's what makes like a bicycle different from, say, a motorcycle, where you have these like pedaling forces that you need to deal with in your suspension design. So is designing suspension for a downhill bike, could that potentially be easier since you aren't as concerned about pedal efficiency? Or like what's kind of the approach there? Is it different than what you would do for, say, a trail bike?
I approach them both the same. And downhill is by far the hardest.
Huh. Okay.
Because any flaw in the system is amplified by the amount of travel and movement that it has.
I see.
It's really easy to target like a 100 mil, 120 mil bike. Just doesn't move that much.
Right.
So if it's off a little bit, you're not really bouncing and pedal bobbing, 3-4 inches of travel like an 8-inch travel bike will have.
Right. I see.
And the downhill race scene is, as much as people don't think you pedal, it's one on the pedals. 100%. Like there's very few tracks where you don't have pedal sections. Actually, when I approach a racetrack, I'll dissect what chainring I'm going to be in, what gear in the back I'm going to be in every single spot on the trail, and how many pedal spots that we have.
Okay.
Like I will dissect, we have 3 pedal spots. I think I'm going to be able to get in 4 to 5 pedal strokes in the first one. And I will dissect it down that far.
It's super important.
To where I know in my mind, I need to be in this gear and pre-shift in that spot, going into the corner before that pedal spot. I'm going to shift 1 time in my pedal spot, and I've got to put a hard 6 pedals in and then get my breath back before the next one.
Yeah. Wow.
And, those, maybe it's just me, but like it's so important in those spots that like a downhill bike has to be extremely crisp in its pedaling.
Yeah. Cause you're putting a ton of force in when you're pedaling, right? I mean, you have these like tiny road cassettes on most mountain bikes or downhill bikes, right? So it's not like, just you're spinning like an easy gear. Like you are mashing the pedals, even though maybe it's only for a few strokes.
Well, I mean, it's very similar to the other disciplines and how much force or whatever. We just use small cassettes because we don't need to climb in the upper gear. So we just take them off to keep it light.
Yeah.
But it's so important. I mean, the race is won in, micro, chunks of seconds.
Yeah.
And, every little tiny like pump or exit speed counts, and you don't get much time to make mistakes, especially when it's a short track and there's not a lot of time on track. Every little thing counts super, super intensely. So I see like a lot of like enduro races where, I mean, you can make half a day of mistakes and still win because it's a 30-minute race. Yeah. And it's not.
It has a lot longer. Yeah. Than 2 minutes or less. Yeah.
You have a lot longer to make up time and have good corners. And So, but in downhill, like, having a miss shift, not being prepared on that one spot, having a bike that's just not efficient in its pedaling, it can add up really, really quick and keep you off the podium.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the suspension designs that your company is working on, CF3 is a newer patent pending suspension design. How's that different from CBF?
This is the one that's on the new Vampire.
Okay.
Since me and my brother split in 2019, this is what I've been doing. And it's a way to like adjust your bike into a low pivot, a high pivot, and like a mid pivot.
Okay.
And I built it so I could have a race bike that I could set it up perfectly for the kind of racetrack that I was going to race. Because there's tracks that are flat and sprinty with kind of bike park jumps that are built for 6-inch travel bikes. There's tracks like Mont St or Val d'Isole, which are extremely rough, and you would love to have a big travel rearward arc bump goblin machine. There's tracks that are kind of halfway in between those.
Okay.
And I saw that, like, for most of my racing, I was on a Canfield Brothers Jedi, which was an amazing bike to have, especially in the 26-inch wheel days, to have that rearward arc. But there was a lot of days where we were racing like Fontana, and there's a 40-second wall sprint that's on flat ground at the end of the track. And you just don't need a bump release pulley wheel bike for that sprint.
Right.
It's going to hold you back. It's a lot more advantageous to have a low pivot sprinty bike in that spot. So we built a couple of versions of low pivot bikes, like the 1 or the 1.2, just to have some variation for those different kind of tracks. I was like, this looks like it's doable. The bike I have, it's a horse link layout. Like I love to say, it looks like a Sessions. The shock is in front of the seat tube, protected from the tire. All the forces go down into the bottom bracket triangle where the down tube, seat tube, and bottom bracket are. So everything that's loaded into force goes right into this little strong triangulated little spot.
Yeah.
And the bike's got 3 main pivots in the seat tube.
Okay.
And you just pull the main suspension pivot pin and pull your chainstay out, put it in the next hole, slide the pin back in, and you got a totally different bike with a totally different wheel path. So the low hole is like a low pivot, -3 on sag back to forward 12, 15, traditional wheel path. In the middle hole runs a pulley wheel. It has a similar wheel path to like a Trek Sessions or even the old Iron Horse Sunday.
Okay.
Where it's about a -9 to 10 on the back of the arc and then comes back to 0. So it's a very vertical wheel path. Carves really well, is really balanced in the corners, has 0 chain stretch. And then when you go up to your upper hole, it has a full gun high pivot rearward path where it's all the way back to -19, back to about -15 on its bottom out. So you have kind of like a choose your own adventure bike.
Yeah.
Because you can go the whole season and you're traveling from spot to spot, and every race, especially pro racers, they're stuck with whatever bike that they're on.
Right.
And these days there's only a couple of low pivot bikes to choose from. And then there's a bunch of mid pivots and a few, really, really high pivot bikes. But you basically just, if you're even an amateur racer, whatever bike you buy, that's what you're stuck with for every single track.
Right.
That's all you get. Let's go. Like, hopefully the tracks are built for the kind of bike that you like to ride, or the bike you have. And I was like, I think I can make this work. And most people, when I was testing it, because I had the first prototype of the CF3 in 2021 and started, testing it and riding it. And it was more of a test mule. I didn't really want to build Vampire or a new bike brand. But I needed to test the new suspension layout that I was working on. So, got the bike and was really blown away that I was able to have all three in one with the same shock. And in those early days, I was like, what if I'm the bad customer? Doesn't change my spring at all when the jumps travel. Because the lowest hole, like the bike that's coming out first is the downhill one.
Okay.
It's called the Fastarossa. The lowest hole is a 150 to 165, depending on the stroke.
Okay.
And the middle hole is a 175 to 190. And the upper hole is a 205 to 220.
Okay.
And they all run the downhill length trunnion shock. So that's a 75 stroke down to the 67.5 stroke.
Wow. Okay.
So in the new world of metric shocks, every eye-to-eye shock, like the downhill, the enduro, and the shorter trail one, they all come in 4-stroke length.
Okay.
So you can just kind of pick which stroke you want to run for the travel segments you want to run. And every jump in stroke is 5 mils different in the travel.
Okay.
So like I try to push people into the Olin shock because they have the 2.5 mil shims to change the stroke in the shock by just bolting a shim underneath the bumper. So you just pull your spring off and slide the bumper up and put a shim in and bolt it in. And you've got the 62.5 stroke instead of the 75.
Okay.
And then all of your travels move down 5 mil. And you can just be like, well, I want a high pivot bike, but 220 is too much for this track. I need it to be a 210 or a 205. You can just pull your spring off and add the amount of spacers you need. And then you can dial in the amount of, travel that you really want, because it's kind of nice to, like, some tracks you need to pump.
Right.
Some tracks you don't, and you want it to be like big gun, big travel.
Yeah. I mean, what do like the athletes that are like on the teams with all the money? I mean, what do they do race to race? Like, do they have access to multiple bikes? I mean, because most of them are sponsored by a brand that only has one downhill bike. So what are they doing to like adapt their bike? Because it sounds like what you're offering is something that doesn't really exist right now, does it?
No. In the past, sometimes the companies they were sponsored by would give them a enduro bike.
Oh, right.
Like when Worlds went to Cairns, Australia for the first time, that track had a 45-second flat pedal to the finish line. Whoa. You came out of the jungle and it was flat for so long.
Why didn't they move that finish line? That's crazy.
I don't know. They just wanted to see who could outsprint each other. Like we were in a
interesting,
a time trial, I guess.
Yeah.
There was a lot of racers that showed up with the company's enduro bike instead of running their downhill bike.
Right.
But truthfully, Jeff, most of these companies want the athlete to ride the downhill bike to promote the downhill bike.
Right. Obviously. Makes sense. Yeah.
You get what you get, and they're like, this is what you're running. We'll just give you let's turn the lockout on, or, make it a really stiff, spring weight to, stiffen up the back end a lot or something like this.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, obviously you're saying this is a great thing for athletes who aren't necessarily sponsored because they can kind of have 3 bikes in one. It sounds like even the people at the top, they could also use it. Like they have an opposite problem, which is they have to race the one bike and it's not really up to them to like pick necessarily the best one for the track on the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have a lot of different, I believe at least four different suspension designs that you work with. And I'm wondering with, the recent expiration of the original DW Link patent, does this open opportunities for new designs or improvements on that design? Or like does this affect you at all? Or what does that look like?
Well, it opened up a lot of real estate when that patent became out of protection. I actually just did a layout for a good friend of mine in Taiwan. Steve Lin.
Okay.
He's the son of the production manager at Pacific Cycles. He does a lot of product development for companies. He works with Z-Road, Chromag, smaller brands, and he has an office with people that are doing the same thing. I was in there looking at new Liat components and PMW components.
Yeah.
because their office is full of, new stuff. And he was working with a new steel company and wanted me to do a layout for a full suspension enduro bike that would run a pinion gearbox in steel. He was building in steel because he had a factory that would like build it for him for the Taipei show. And I was like, I'd love to, hook this up and do one for you. But if I do a CBF one, you got to sign up and pay me some money. And my other clients are going to be kind of pissed. Right. So I was like, I could, what do you want? And he's like, well, I want a multi-link layout. And I was like, I could do it like a DW layout for you. Mm-hmm. So I laid out like a DW version with a horseshoe around the seat tube. Mm-hmm. So he could have a good functioning working, bike. And, I know how to lay out multi-link bikes really well. And so just because the DW was out of spec, I could send him those without any issues with patents. And also I can CBF tune a DW.
Oh, interesting.
There's one on my Instagram, on Suspension Formula's Instagram, which is, you can see there that there's like a VPP version CBF and a DW version CBF. Mm-hmm. I have a Law Will version CBF, which is basically just tuning those suspension designs with my CBF patent. Yeah. Putting that center of curvature on top of the chainring in the protected zone.
I mean, does that work? Like, is there an advantage to doing that? That's very interesting that you could kind of apply your patent to that one. And then like what happens? Is that like a really, really good design, or is it like a compromised design? Like or is it just more of a thought exercise? Like
sometimes yes, sometimes no. The DW laid out version, I actually sent that model to my brother a couple of years ago, and he thought about changing up his layouts to something new. Mm-hmm. So similar, like the shock is in front of the seat tube, but that layout, the shock has to be pretty low. So it would look very similar to like an old Giant Faith, where the shock kind of had to hang and mount kind of in front and below the BB area. Mm-hmm. So it would have like side plates to hold the shock mount in front of the BB, and then have like a front connection where the down tube comes and welds into it. Okay. And so in general, if you looked at like a regular DW that isn't CBF tuned, you don't have those construction restraints. Mm-hmm. And, those designs work great. Dave did a good job on those. So I think that there is an advantage to CBF because of the chain doesn't fight you with, the pedaling performance through rough terrain. Mm-hmm. And as far as I can tell with, a lot of the forums that talk about which is better suspension design, people are feeling that. They're feeling like, it feels better on a downhill. It feels a lot more, less pedal kicky and bump absorption, like smooth. Mm-hmm. And the climbs are really great, except for like a DW, for a reference, is they're using their upper link a lot higher than the chain line. Mm-hmm. And that means that they're way below the instant center, which gives it that like really crisp, smooth pedaling feel, smooth when you're on smooth terrain pedaling feel. Mm-hmm. And, I could do that to a CBF, but it would just cause a lot more pedal kick, just like DW does. So right. I don't really feel that we do it a little bit with some models, like a low travel Revel, like their range. They wanted it to be a little more like punchy in its pedaling feel, because those guys don't feel the downhills as much at 115 travel. Right. And so they're like, we just want it to have that little bit more punchy feel. Let's go a little higher. So it is kind of nice that when the patents, release, like you're not constrained by, the claims that they make that keep you from using stuff. Because DW's claims that, the real estate for him was, if your upper link points at your lower link, it's his. And so for all those years, like you had to avoid your upper link ever pointing at your lower link. So your lower link couldn't be super long and in front of the BB, because if the upper link pointed at it, it would infringe. And so as soon as that patent was out of spec, you're like, oh, now the real estate's open. We're not constrained by that patent anymore.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, is it difficult? You mentioned working with Revel on one of their bikes. Like, is it difficult working with brands as a suspension designer? Like, I would imagine sometimes your design is going to get compromised, or like what are the challenges involved there?
It's really easy to to work with brands in that way. I find it, if I could just do that, which is, I mean, let's face it, Jeff, like building your own stuff and designing things and warranting and sales and all the office work that it takes, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And for me to do a suspension pivot layout and do some free consulting to a brand, that's a lot easier. And then when the project is out of my hands and off to them, they go along and sell it for years and years and years. They send me royalties when they sell bikes.
Right. Is that expensive for them? I mean,
no.
Because a lot of brands have their own like in-house thing or whatever. And I always wonder, do they do that to save money? Like, is it saving them significant money, or why wouldn't they just license something that works really well?
I'm a little baffled sometimes. I think that they look at the bottom line and they're trying to save pennies everywhere they can. I think it's easier for me to sell to a brand that's brand new that needs the street cred like right out of the gate.
Or they don't have people to do that. I mean, they're probably,
Right.
You start with a small team and you may not have somebody that can design.
I think it's like anything. Like if you have something that works really well, that is trusted by the customers, if you just put it on the bike and put the logo there, it immediately gives the customers confidence that this is going to ride well.
Yeah.
I'm not risking buying a brand new brand or this product because, I don't know if it's going to ride good. What did their engineer do? Like, is it really going to be that great?
Yeah.
Key and Point, the Haro brand did a enduro bike, and the review on Pink Bike yesterday was kind of so. He was just like, yeah, it's okay. If they would have came to me and done a CBF, immediately everybody that rode a CBF would be like, oh, I have another option.
Yeah.
Like that bike is definitely going to ride how Chris makes him ride. And I have full confidence to go out and get this bike now.
Yeah.
I don't really think it's all that much. I mean, right now, CBF is $100 a bike for a brand to license.
Okay.
And that's $300 more in retail. So at the end of the day, it's a big chunk of outlay for the brand, because they're building a bike, for a certain amount of money, somewhere around $2,000 to $3,000 in general terms.
Yeah.
And that's why a bike is, just 3x your bike.
Right.
That's what the retails are. So your $9,000 bike is usually about a $3,000 build, give or take. I mean, it's a little different in frame onlys like I do. Maybe it's only 50% for some brands and, like 3x for other brands. But in general, it's only a little bit of more outlay. But say your $5,000 mid-price build, if you put CBF on it, it's $5,300 now instead of $5,000.
Yeah.
But the marketing that you get off that, I think outweighs the price you pay to use my suspension. And I hope it would. I think Revel is killing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That brand went from 0 to 40 employees in 4 years.
Wow. Yeah.
It was one of the fastest growing mountain bike brands I think we've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like as a consumer, sometimes with a lot of these designs, every one of these designs, whether it's like a licensed one or not, there's a lot of marketing involved in it, right? Like they're all saying that they're the best, right? And so as a consumer, it is hard to know. And we've been burned by so many too, like suspension designs that like say a brand will have their own thing and it's like 2 seasons later, it's gone and they're just like doing a different thing and claiming lots of things with this new one. So yeah, I think you're right that if you can have this licensed, like known suspension design that like, because it takes a while for people to ride it and to say, yeah, like that works really well. Whereas we do tend to see other designs that kind of come and go.
It's true. I would hope that people see the value that I offer in offering CBF. I just did another brand a couple years ago that's still in R&D. The brand is Flow, but I think they're going to release under the label Castle.
Okay.
They're one of them's out of Boise, Idaho, where it'll be based, but the owner's out of Lake Tahoe.
Okay.
They only did kid bikes before, but they wanted to do an enduro bike, and I basically laid out one that's the upper hull of my Vampire.
Okay.
I had been testing it. It's CBF tuned, like high pivot with a pulley wheel, and they wanted an enduro travel just with that one setup. And they're looking to do the Atherton type construction with the carbon tubes and the lugs.
Okay.
And build them in Boise, Idaho.
Wow, that's cool.
But I think that for an unknown brand to come out, it really does like immediately put street cred on you, and you can sell some stuff like right out of the gate, and just hopefully I get a little cut.
Right. Well, yeah, let's circle back to Vampire bikes.
Sure.
And you mentioned that it sounds like the first bike is going to be a downhill bike. And so, yeah, is that kind of the customer that you're targeting first, or is that going to be like kind of the primary customer you see for this bike? Is that like gravity, pretty much downhill oriented customer?
Me, I build for what I need. Because I'm a downhiller at heart.
You're like, wait, there's other kinds of mountain bikers out there.
I didn't really even consider the rest of you guys. Sorry. The truth is that's what I ride, and that's what I built for myself. It's a steel front triangle, aluminum rear, and that's what I want to ride. But I do have a titanium front, more enduro focused bike coming out maybe in the summer.
Okay.
If you look behind me, Jeff.
Oh, sweet.
That's it right there.
I see a titanium front triangle.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've got one half built right here.
Wow. That's cool. Are you welding? Do you weld yourself? Do you build some of these?
I can weld, but you don't want me to weld a bike. No.
To like prototype level, at least where you can like get on it? Is it good enough for that? No.
I mean, I could prototype weld, but it's easier and cheaper to have my factories do it.
Okay. Gotcha.
So the enduro one with the tie, that one's really focused, shorter travel. So the low hole is a 140, the middle is a 160, and the upper one is a 190.
Okay. Whoa.
And that one is a lot more, mainstream focused, what like the normal customer can need. So the range on travel, the low hole is a 125 to 140. The middle is a 145 to 160. And the upper hole is a 175 up to 190.
Okay.
So you can really have a trail, enduro, and downhill in one rig. And I did a lot of enduro racing in those years I was testing this. Went to Trophy of Nations for the second time they did it, and probably the last.
Yeah.
And the only time they added the Masters Pro category. It was so awesome because that was the race where they had the three people from the country all together in one train.
Yeah.
It was the most fun race of all time.
Yeah, that looked awesome.
But this bike is so focused on kind of being your whole quiver in one bike. I mean, the downhill one, you can enduro race it because of the lower hole. It's dropper compatible, but not long dropper compatible. Where the titanium one, my large fits a 210 pretty easily with extra room. I could maybe do a 220 in it. The bike is pretty awesome though for an enduro race bike, because enduro, you have to run the same bike for the 2 days you race, and you're doing up to like 8 tracks, and sometimes those tracks have flat pedaling sections and climbs in them.
Right.
And some of those tracks are World Cup downhill, bumpy death tracks.
Yeah. That's what's fun. They mix it up like that.
Yeah. And for reference, I was at National Champs Winter Park. That was only a 4-track race. And so the first 3 tracks were pretty minimal bike parky, pedally tracks. And I was in the middle hole in 160, like the whole first 3 laps.
Wow.
So I got to the last lap, which was Trestle DH. And I was like, wait a sec, I'll just pull my pin and put it up into 190 rearward arc high pivot mode and have like a downhill bike in the back and just smoke this track. And so Ryan Rodriguez was there, and I just had him hold my bike for a second. This is before I figured out to just turn the bike over onto its handlebar and seat to hold itself.
That doesn't look very pro, but yeah, that's probably the easiest way to do it.
Yeah. Now it's just flip your bike over.
Yeah.
You just have to pull the main pin. So it's like pull off the pulley wheel, pull off the main pin, slide the rear triangle to the next hole, and put the pin back in, put the pulley wheel back in the spot it needs to go, and you're good.
Wow.
So after I just switched it over, Rhino's like, what the hell did you just do to your bike? And I was like, push on the seat.
Yeah.
he pushed on the seat, and it, just dropped into monster travel. And he's like, holy crap, dude, this is a downhill bike now. I was like, yeah. And I tell this story all the time, but I caught and passed 4 people on that lap.
Wow. That's incredible.
Well, they were riding, 150 travel forward arc enduro bikes on a downhill track.
Right.
And I had a 190 rearward arc, full-size downhill, let's go, setup. And it takes less than 2 minutes to change holes.
Yeah.
Sometimes like EWS or whatever it's called now, EDR, you don't have time in between those. I mean, you're out of breath and like roll up and they're like, okay, you got 30 seconds. You're like, are you kidding me? I just did 1 hour of climbing at, the highest heart rate I have. And now I got to drop again.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, those are so tight. I don't know what they're doing. I think they're just trying to punish people for fun.
Right.
But in normal, enduros, you got 15, 20 minutes, sometimes a half hour to drop. And you can easily grab a snack and then change your travel to the hole that fits the track.
Yeah. And
I was like, this is the biggest unfair advantage cheater bike I've ever seen.
Yeah. Game changer. Well, tell us, how did you come up with the name for the brand? I'm curious. It's vampire is not a word we've seen in bikes before that I can think of.
Honestly, that's why it became the brand name. I wanted to do it for a long time. Me and my brother weren't on always the best terms, trying to work with your brother.
Yeah.
I tried to buy him out for about 10 years straight, and just it got to the point where he finally was like, okay, we got to do something. And it came down to no one's going to buy a brand with our name on it because it's our name. And then, it was like, you either take the brand or one of us takes the brand and one of us takes, the patent. And I was the one that did the patent, and I wasn't going to give that to him.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, you just take the brand. I'll take my patent and we'll split ways. And so, I've always kind of had this vampire, thing in the back of my mind. If I split off, that's what I would use. I actually didn't like the darkness of it. Like the idea of what a real vampire is pretty dark, and that's not me at all.
Yeah. Well, it's right. It's not like the bikes I've seen, the stuff you've posted on Instagram. Right. It's not that, right? It's not, I mean, I would think it would be like YT, like their stuff is really dark, and yours is not that.
Yeah. And I'm definitely not trying to push that kind of look but it is really fun that there's a lot of imagery and Halloween pre-made stuff that I can use for booth displays.
Yeah. Oh, and I just got it. The holes. Is that it? You got the holes, and it's like the fang holes?
Somebody mentioned it on one of the forums, no matter what hole you're in, there's 2 bite marks in the seat tube.
Yeah.
It's that is so funny. That's not really, I really like the idea of immortal bikes. I really hate the disposable culture that we live in. The 3-year phone, a bike that you crash, in the rock garden and you poke a hole in your carbon.
Yeah.
I don't like that part of our world. I want stuff that would last a lifetime if you wanted it to. In Canfield, we always did that. We had big bearings, big axles. And if you look back, there's a whole bunch of our 2021 Fatty Fats still running. A lot of the old Fatty Fats from 2004 and 6 that are running. And I would say 90% of the Jedis that we built from 2008 to 2017 are all still alive.
Wow. Yeah. Metal bikes, they're immortal.
And, I'm using titanium and steel in the front triangles, aluminum in the rear because it's CNCable, it's light and stiff, and for the application. And there's a certain amount of vibration damping that happens with a steel front triangle on a full suspension.
Mm-hmm.
Most people haven't felt it. There's only a few full suspension steel bikes or titanium bikes that have been built.
Mm-hmm.
And most people's experience with that material is hardtails.
Right.
And they definitely feel it in a hardtail land. But when you start amplifying your speed on a full suspension and doing big drops on a full suspension that has that material in the front, you realize it feels like riding low air pressure tires.
Interesting.
It feels really soft on your body. You really have a lot of confidence because it just feels really smooth and calm.
Mm-hmm.
A customer came over yesterday and his response to the first rides on his Vampire was like, this is just calm. It feels just settled.
Yeah. Yeah. And we just saw, I guess that was last year, Southern Gravity came out with their steel downhill bikes. And yeah, so it seems like you're onto something there for sure.
It definitely seemed in the last couple of years that it came back into fashion. Luckily for me, because I've always loved them, mm-hmm. I've always wanted to build that material, and knowing that that's not the material for everyone.
Right.
I mean, let's face it, everybody wants a Ferrari-looking carbon fiber bike with the cool-looking tube sets that give you all those fun edges and like, you can put a trunk in your down tube to hold your tube and your candy bars.
Right. Yeah.
But there is a lot of people that really appreciate that sound mm-hmm. of steel, that like tink, tink, tink.
That's great.
That smooth feel of it and the look of the small round tube. And for some people it's crack. And that's my people.
Yeah.
But I get it. I don't want Vampire to be a big thing. Mm-hmm. My focus in life is to build amazing bikes and, offer a little bit to the people that want them and still have enough free time to go snowboard every day and ride my bike every day.
Yeah. That's the dream.
It really is. Like, I definitely try to tell people like, hey, I do the best I can, and I'll be available, but I'm going to build you stuff that you're not going to need replacement parts, and you're not going to be dealing with warranties and mm-hmm. a broken derailleur hanger. You're going to be one and done and happy, so you're not bugging me on the phone like with an emergency.
Right. Well, so tell us, what are your plans for 2025? How soon are people going to be able to order their own Vampire bike?
Technically, they could bug me right now and get one. My website will most likely open up on February 8th.
Okay.
I'm a big numbers guy, mm-hmm. and 8 is like the money number.
Oh, right.
You'll see that everything in Asia is that same way. Mm-hmm. Like in Hollywood too, they believe in that stuff, and there is a certain mystical.
Yeah, you're not going to wait till August 8th, though, right?
No, I'm not going to pull an 8/8. But like, I did put a PO in on a 28th, which is another like money number. Mm-hmm. So if somebody was motivated enough to get an early one, they could bug me right now, and I'll give them access to the website mm-hmm. with the passcode. Okay. And I'm going to send out emails to anyone that's on the email list. Mm-hmm. Because if you go to vampire.bike right now, it's password protected.
Okay.
And then there's a, sign up for the email list that's on there. And I've got over 200 people already like signed up in the last month and a half since putting it up. Mm-hmm. And so whoever's on there is going to get an email sometime soon that will give them access to the website with the password, and I'll give them a few days if they want to buy a bike before they're gone, because I only have about 40 bikes left.
Okay.
And when they're gone, they're gone. I only built 100. The titanium batch comes in like 20 batches.
Okay.
So, and honestly, I sold 2 yesterday in the titanium.
Wow.
I was like, well, all right, guys, it's getting pretty low. I might have to, because I only have a certain amount of rear ends for those.
Yeah.
So those people have access at that time. And then if there's any left, the website will open up on the 8th.
Okay. Gotcha. Great. Well, Chris, thanks so much for taking the time to chat. I learned a ton about suspension design, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you come up with next.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Well, you can follow along with the launch of Vampire Bikes on Instagram at vampire_bikes and learn more about some of the suspension designs we discussed at suspension-formulas.com. And then there's also the Vampire website, vampire.bike, which you can go on and sign up for the email list. That's all we've got for now. We'll talk to you again soon.